So Nordea Investment Management that I represent, we have quite a strong focus on sustainability. So the problems that Professor Santamoris showed, those we would like to address. But to be able to address them, we need to have investment philosophies, investment portfolios that meets investors' needs. So what we looked into in 22 was that we had nothing. We had the conclusion that the ESG scores, sustainability scores we made on issuers had no values for the covered bonds. So what we have is based on the targets of the Paris Agreement, the EU Green Deal, and based on the trajectories set out by CRREM, we have constructed 3 things that we incorporate into all our covered bond portfolios, and a couple to some extent, and to a large extent into 2 portfolios that are specifically targeting sustainability in covered bonds. I'm not talking green bond portfolios, those have a life of themselves. So we have 3 investor needs. We have sustainable investments after SFDR. So if we look at covered bonds and sustainability, of course it's all about greenhouse gas emissions. So but there are different views. What do you want to enable? Do you want to allocate your money to low emissions, or do you want to allocate your money to change? So for that we have 3 ways of looking at sustainability. We have sustainable investments, so that's according to the definition of SFDR, which enables us to create a portfolio where we reward the cover pools that are longer on the journey to being aligned with the Paris Agreement. I'll go into each of the steps in a while. That we introduced in all of our portfolios in the middle of last year. This year, we expanded with a net zero asset managers initiative calculation for each portfolio. So that allows us to look at, are these cover pools, are they following the trajectory set out by the Carbon Real Estate Risk Monitor for decarbonization of real estate, residential real estate primarily, in each country? And lastly, this year we finalized the methodology for carbon accounting for covered bonds. It has just finished the hearing phase, so by next year we hope to start reporting by it. We have a slight problem, my last slide, that is how big that problem is, but basically is no issuers in Europe are reporting what we need. So, if we dived into that, then looking at sustainable investments in covered bonds, it is about 2 things, and we have that from the EU taxonomy for ownership and acquisition of buildings. So one thing is how much energy is being used per square meter. So we are not that interested in emissions per million, because that doesn't really say anything about whether or not a pool of housing is sustainable or not. Because if we take the same house and we take it from central London, or we take it from the countryside in some other place in the UK, I'm not familiar with that, then we will have the same emissions per square meter, but we will have a much higher valuation in the center of London, which means that if we looked at it as financed emissions per million, we wouldn't necessarily say anything about whether or not the house is sustainable or not. So for that we need to know how much energy is being used to heat or cool that house, and we need to know the composition of that energy. So those are the 2 elements that goes into our sustainability model for covered bonds, but that doesn't tell us very much about when is it sustainable. for that, we need the decarbonization calculations from CRREM, which basically states that on average, Europe needs to decarbonize 92% when we reach 2050 from a starting point in 2019. That's a little bit difficult to work with because those calculations are in greenhouse gas emissions per square meter, which nobody gives us from the issuers. So we can't do that. So to be able to work with it, we have translated it into, with the current energy mix, then how many kilowatt hours can be from non-sustainable energy sources. When we calculate all of that together, we see that some countries, so 2 countries, are completely operating sustainable, even though they have a fairly large energy use. And that's Norway and Iceland. Norway, wind and water, and Iceland, geothermal energy. So their energy sources are clean, thus the emissions from the houses are in the very, very low end in Europe. They're already operating as we all should be. But we can't, because we are all not gifted with that much energy as Norway have and volcanoes like Iceland. So each country are at a different step in the journey towards reaching the Paris alignment. And for an investor, that means that we can construct a portfolio where there will be an overweight towards the countries that are further along in substituting their energy sources, and an underweight in the countries that are lagging behind. To get to these numbers, we look at primarily data from Eurostat, looking at the energy composition for the heating and the cooling of the houses. Some energy sources we like, they are zero or near zero emissions. So we look at how much of the energy, the total energy for heating and cooling in a country is from non-renewable sources or these zero or near zero sources. That gives us a baseline for each country. The question then became, is that even remotely relevant for a bank's cover pool? For that, we embarked in 22 and 23 on a fact-finding mission where we asked 60 of the 200 relevant covered bond issuers in Europe, relevant for us as an investor. And for most of them, they said, yeah, their cover pool was actually looking very much like the total cover pool of the country. Because what happens when you start issuing covered bonds in the market? You need to issue them as benchmark bonds, and you need to have liquidity, which means that your cover pool will tend to look like the total population in the area you serve. So that's our baseline. That's the national calculations. In the end, I'll get to how we then get from national calculations into sometimes even down to ISIN levels. Switching to Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative, that's a little different way of looking at the sustainability, because where the sustainable investments is very, very much about the energy composition. The Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative is more about, are you changing enough already? For that, by that, we are able to make portfolios that allocate capital to countries that have done the change or are ahead of their curve. So a more action-oriented portfolio. For that, we go back to the CRREM decarbonization curves again. On the slide, you have the blue line, which is Europe as an average, just as a benchmark. And then I have taken my own country, Denmark, as an example. So we are hugging the curve. Some countries, some years, we are a little bit ahead. Some years, we are a little bit behind. And that is basically how much the wind is blowing. So if you imagine a portfolio, a European covered bond portfolio, it will have a benchmark set together by different weights of each country. Some of the countries will be ahead of their curves, some countries will be behind their curves. In this portfolio that is more action-oriented, the portfolio manager that wants to chase returns in a country that is behind, in this graph that means above the curve, that's more greenhouse gas emissions per square meter than they should be according to CRREM. So if a portfolio manager wants to go chase returns in such countries, he needs to balance it out with other countries that are ahead of their curves. Constructing a portfolio that then aligns with the climate ambition of the client. So say a client wants to have a portfolio that is targeting net zero in 2045 or 2040 instead of 2050. That we could do then by saying how much below the curve does your portfolio needs to be on average. So these two things allows us to have two different philosophies that we can sell to our clients. And quite a lot of our clients, they ask for how we integrate ESG into their cover pools. And they also want the calculations of the actual emissions. So let's jump to that. For that, we look in the harmonized transparency template by the covered bond label. So Mr. Tobiakis, that was right before me, said that the industry needs to set the standards or the EU needs to set the standards. We believe that the template that is being used by many issuers today by the covered bond label is almost perfect. There's one field that I'm advocating today that we add, I'll get to that in the end, but it's almost perfect, that template. This is a draft of the TAP HTT or BHTT mortgage assets in that template for the mortgage bond issuer of my own bank, Nordea. There are two fields. The field 15, which is the EPC scores, the energy performance certificates, the distribution of those, estimated or actual. We are quite interested in getting this information from all issuers, because that goes back to the thing I told you before, that in 22 and 23 we went out and asked the issuers if their cover pool looked like the country's cover pool. By looking at the EPC scores, we can see if the distribution of one issuer looks nicely normally distributed, or perhaps it's tilted towards the higher scores or the lower scores. That tells us if we can use country estimates for this issuer, if the issuer do not disclose all the information that I'll be bringing up on the next couple of slides. The other field that we are very interested in is the energy use intensity. So that's the energy use in kilowatt hours. Both of these numbers for many issuers are part of the initial lending process. Because the EPC scores, that's mandatory now from EU for new mortgages, and the energy use intensity is also quite critical in the valuation of each house. So if you had a house in Denmark and it's very energy intensive, that will, to a very high degree, affect the ability of the lender to pay the mortgage because of the size of the energy bills. So these two numbers are quite important for us when we assess what is the sustainability level of this cover pool. If we have the energy use intensity, we can take the energy composition from Eurostat, and that way we can calculate what is the estimated greenhouse gas emissions per square meter, which is our golden number. Very few issuers give us these numbers, so I'm here to advocate for more to do so. One step further, the same tab, we have field 20, which is the actual emissions, either per million, which we need for the PCAF calculations. We have so many clients who have called us, mostly during last year, more this year, because now they're seeing that this standard is coming out, and we need to do better in the financed emissions per million. Right now, most issuers, they're taking the financed emissions per million from the issuer. We do not believe that is relevant for the cover pool. Because if you take a bank like Nordea, we have corporate finance, we have private finance, we have institutional finance, we have even some fossil fuel finance, and all of that goes into the financed emissions of the bank as a whole. We're not interested in that when we have a covered pool, a covered bond portfolio. We are interested in the emissions from the houses that are getting financed in the cover pool. So, calculating the financed emissions per million, we need that for the PCAF calculations of ourselves and our clients. But also, and you can see not even Nordea has published yet the kilo of CO2 per square meter. I think about 6 issuers in Europe has done that. But that is the golden number. That is the number that allows us to compare each issuer's sustainability level in the covered bonds with each other. Because it's all about what are the greenhouse gas emissions per square meter. Yeah, there's a question from the room.
Hi. As you drilled down in the previous one in point 15 into label A, for example, and estimated label A, if you have national statistic data there, but in table 20, I would assume that both of them is of course included, or? So both of them is the total statistical background.
Introduce yourself like this, everyone knows it.
Sure.
Günther
Kodowski from Erste Group.
I actually cannot answer that question because I don't care. I want the issuers to calculate this for me. I will estimate the way I just showed, where I take from Eurostat, I take the amount of kilowatt hours used for residential real estate in each country. If I don't have it in the HTT, then I need to take the national numbers. I also have from Eurostat the energy composition, which allows me through the the greenhouse gas intensity factors from PCAF to translate into an estimate for what is this number on the right in field 20 in the HTT. So I can do the estimates, and I do make them, but it would be so much more valuable and precise if it's the issuer that makes these estimates. It's of course better if they do it all on reported data, but the one that is closest to the data is the one that should estimate it. If we're looking at how many issuers actually provide this number, forgot one. So the new tab that was also made a little bit of commercial for in the previous entry, that's the F1. That's about the sustainable bonds. Primarily, that means green bonds, if you're in covered bonds. So here I can see that Nordea Credit, they have said that 16.2% of the cover pool would be eligible for the green bond program of Nordea Credit. So that is an extremely important number for me as an investor, because we have a green bond portfolio based on covered bonds. But what if a standard European bank went out and said that they had 30% of their cover pool that was eligible? We have from the taxonomy that 15%, the top 15% most energy efficient housing in each country can be considered sustainable. So if a covered bond issuer says that 30% is sustainable, that tells me two things. It tells me that either they are very different from the national pool, so they have a portfolio that is very different from the average. I have one example of that. That's one of the cover pools from Berlin Hüb that separate, make a special pool for the energy refurbishment loans and the high energy efficiency loans. So from them, I know I should be expecting a higher number. But if it's a general bank that has no high ESG focus, I would be highly suspicious of the sustainability quality of a covered bond, green covered bond, if it had a number that is much higher than 15%. So that's why it is super critical for me to have the number of what is the percentage of the cover pool that the issuer C lives up to their green bonds. It actually tells us, can we put that green bond into our SFDR Article 9 Green Bond Fund? The number that I'm missing here, that I would love for you to add in the next template, that is what percentage of the actual cover pool has been issued as green bonds. Because what I do is I say that the green bonds, if we accept them as high enough quality, those count as 100% sustainability. But if I have the general level of sustainability of the total cover pool at 50%, and then suddenly 10% has been issued as green bonds at 100, I need to adjust down my estimate of the sustainability level of the rest of the cover pool. But I cannot do that if you don't tell me what percentage of the cover pool has been issued as green bonds. And right now, that number is not systematically published anywhere. It's not in Bloomberg, it's not in the HTT, and it's not on most issuers' webpage, which means that I'm in jeopardy of doing greenwashing if I allow the bonds in the portfolio. So that's why for every green bond, we do a quite rigorous screening for the quality before we accept it into our Article 9 funds. And it would help immensely if all issuers publish this number and the share of green bonds issued from the cover pool. The way we go about it is that we would love for the issuer to publish this on the generic cover pool and on their green bonds. That would be the golden solution, estimated or not. If we don't get it on reported, on estimated from the issuer, then we will apply, if we deem that the issuer is looking like the national level, we will apply these national level estimates we have done. If we do not deem that the issuer looks like the national level and they do not report themselves, we will set the sustainability level to 0, which means not accessible in our Article 9 funds and being subject to underweight in our Article 8 funds. So it's quite important for us to get this data from you in terms of to which portfolios and to which extent can we allocate capital to those cover pools. Status in the market as per the end of last year, we look at 218 issuers. 146 used the HTT, 1 used the Austrian transparency template. We would love for all to use the HTT. Only 31 give us the energy performance scores. 22, the energy intensity. Now we are getting down to real low numbers. Only 13 for the financed emissions. And then 33, it goes up then for the green and social, because when you have a green bond, you're proud of that and you want to show the numbers. So that's good. We would just love to know what are the share of the portfolio as green bonds. All of this helps us as an investor to make products that people will buy. And we need more people to buy the ESG integrated covered bonds, because otherwise, how can we address those challenges as mentioned by Professor Santamoris? It's how we can contribute as an asset manager, provide products that clients want to allocate capital to, and by that means allocate capital to those countries that makes a difference in the adjustment toward Paris alignment.